In this video, I'm going to be showing you how to create your very own splash screen using the Sega Genesis SDK. In previous videos, I've gone over using the Sega Genesis development kit, using Visual Studio, VS Code. In my last video, I went over how to detect the region of the system. Well, today I'm going to be showing you how to create your very own splash screen. And we're going to basically be going over three phases. One is the graphics, two is the sound, to introduce some audio into that splash screen, and the last part will be the actual code used to render it, fade it in, fade it out, and then eventually that will progress to your title screen. So if you're not familiar with Sega Genesis development or 8-bit, 16-bit development in general, you're really restricted to the color palettes you can use, as well as just the overall graphics and audio, right? There's limiting sound processors and graphics engines as it relates to what we have today, right? We're looking at hardware from the late 80s, early 90s. So we can still use modern graphics, however, we have to tweak them. So what I'm going to be showing you today is I actually have my logo. Right, so I'm going to be using this for the splash screen. So what we're going to do is we're going to start off, we're mainly going to be using two tools here, well, three tools. VS Code for the code, which is normal. We're going to be using Photoshop for the graphics, and we're going to be using Definitely Mask for the audio. So let's start with the graphics. And what we're going to do is we're just going to open Photoshop and we're going to bring in, let's go ahead and bring in our logo. First thing we need to do here is I like to fill the background black, just to kind of keep things, keep the color palettes all in sync. With my logo, I'm filling it with black. If this was white, you'd fill it with white. You get the general idea. So we're just going to use the bucket tool, and we're going to fill that. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to crop this, and just bring this up a little bit here, just to get rid of some extra space so that it looks a little bit centered on the Genesis. So that's pretty good. Now we're going to change the image size. So right now we're sitting at 714 by 714. The Genesis uses tiles, as most gaming platforms do, and each tile is 8 pixels by 8 pixels. What that means is any dimensions of anything you want to render on the screen needs to be divisible by 8 in order for it to span tiles. You cannot partially span a tile. So what we're going to do is I'm going to do, let's do 192 by 192. Should give us pretty good dimensions to work with. And then the next thing we're going to do is we're going to do image mode and switch this to indexed color. We can't use RGB because of the Genesis graphics processor. I'm going to do local adaptive. We're going to make sure colors is 16. And force black and white is fine. Make sure there's no transparency here. We're going to hit OK. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to do File, Export, Save for Web or Legacy. And you're going to come up here to your presets and you're going to do PNG 8 128 the third. And then you're going to switch colors to 64. Make sure transparency is unchecked. You don't want transparency. And you want your matte to be whatever your background color is. So I'm doing black in this case. And then that's pretty much it. Now we're going to save this. And I'm just going to create a folder here. And I'm going to say Genesis converted. And we're going to save it in here. This is the logo. So now we've got the logo done. I'm going to go ahead and minimize Photoshop. And now I'm going to go into the sound editing tool. I'm using the legacy version of this tool. This tool is used to create pretty much any audio tracks that you want to create for any of the retro systems you can do in here. In fact, what we're going to do is we're going to open an existing track. They include sample tracks. So if we look under modules here, you can see they have Master System. They've got PC Engine, which is TurboGrafx 16, NES, Game Boy, the Commodore 64, and also Genesis. I'm going to go in Genesis. We're going to go in Demo Songs. And here you can see a bunch of different demo songs. So if I open one of my favorite songs is the Green Hill Zone. Obviously not good for an intro, but we can just open, and here you can hear. Right, so if you've played Sonic, it's a very familiar sound. But what we're going to do is, I actually like this first one. And so this is a really nice track for an intro screen. So we're going to go with this one. Let me go ahead and swap this. The Genesis the Genesis SDK requires a specific format. Right, so right now this is in the tools format. We're going to export the VGM. So we're just going to say save VGM. And VGM is basically video game music. And then we're going to put this in that same folder. Great, so in here, I'm just going to say Retro Mic intro music. Okay. And so obviously this was a quick, easy way of grabbing that intro music. Ideally, you would compose it yourself to make it unique. But we're just gonna, for the purposes of this video, we're just gonna go with that sample. Alright, next up is the actual coding part. So we want to open up Visual Studio Code. We're going to create a new project. So we're going to do create project. And we'll create a new folder here called Genesis Intro. Looks like I have unsaved changes. We'll go ahead and save those. Alright. Now the first thing we're going to do is we need to bring in our resources. So we're going to create a new file. And I'm going to call this resources.res. Okay. So this will essentially be kind of our import of any of our external assets. Typically when you do development, they're known as resources. This could be images, it could be sounds, it could be tile maps, sprite sheets, those types of things. For the purpose of this video, we're keeping it simple. So we're going to do image, and then we're going to do a space. And then here we're going to name our image that we'll be able to use in variables throughout the code. So I'm just going to call this, whoops, get caps lock on, Retro Mic logo. Right? And then we're going to give it the file name. I'm going to call it Retro Mic logo.png. And then this last option is the type that we want to kind of load it in the memory. If you want any type of compression, this is where you would do it. We're just going to say none here. We just want to load the image straight up. Now, in order for this to load, it needs to be in this res folder. So we're going to, I'm going to right click on the res folder, do reveal in File Explorer. This will open it. We need to put our soundtrack here, and we also need to put our image here. So I've got those over here. So I'm just going to copy those. We're going to paste them here, and they'll automatically import into VS Code. That's good. And then we need to add the resource entry for our soundtrack. Now soundtracks are going to be XGM here. So we export it as a VGM, but that we'll be able to use that as an XGM. So we're gonna name it. So let's just do Retro Mic intro track. And our file name is Retro Mic Intro Music. Oops. Retro Mic Intro Music.vgm. And then our last parameter here is going to be -1. We don't have multiple tracks here, so we're just going to use -1. Now, we can actually build this. If we just do a compile, it should create this resources header file. So here we can see it created the resource header file. It's got our audio track in it, and it's got our image in it. So perfect. So now if we go over to our main class, we need to import that resources file. So we're just going to do include, and we're going to do resources.h. So that'll import our resources header file, and that's so we can use those variables. We don't need the hello world, but this we'll leave here. What I like to do, especially for intro screens, is I like to put them in a separate function or method. So in this case, I'm going to create another method here, and we're just going to call it run intro. So I'm going to do run intro. And then we can call that from our main method. And we could always capture, we'll do intro result here. And this would allow us to, if it errored out or anything, we wanted to capture it, display error message to the user, whatever we might want to do here, we can act upon it. And so that's why we're returning an integer here. Alright, so the first thing we want to do is we're going to the launch. I'm going to have it start playing the track. Then I'm going to load the image, fade it in, fade it out, fade it in again, fade it out again. Kind of give that flashing. We kind of have that neon sign, so kind of give that flashing without the neon effect. And then we'll stop the music, and then that's where you get to the title screen. So we're going to start off by playing an audio track. So to do that, all you have to do is xgm _ start play. And in here, we just specify our track variable. So we're going to do ampersand. And we named it Retro Mic Intro Track. Right, and so if we just run this, if we compile and run this, just make sure all is good. Looks like we may have an error, so let's view the output here. We want terminal. Okay. Let's see what we got here. Oops. Unused variables, fine. That is fine. Oh, we forgot to return. So you always have to do a return at the end here. So we would return a code of 0, which means success. If you wanted to return errors midstream, you could do that. Alright, let's see here. Let's do a clean and then a rebuild. So we should be good on this one. Oh, I forgot a semicolon here at the end of the call. Alright, compile and run. There we go. Alright, so our ROM launched and it's playing music. Alright, so now we know that part's working and you can see how easy it is to play music. So really cool. Alright, the next thing we're going to do, in order to do the fade in, we're going to basically we're basically going to draw the image from a memory buffer. So what I'd like to do here is initialize a palette array to kind of load it into, to know once it's been complete. So we're just going to do U16. I'm just going to call this palette complete. And it's going to be an array of 64. Again, this is because our palette can contain 64 colors. And then we want to make sure that we're disabling the interrupts so that we don't get any conflicting code running. And then we want to also make sure that we re-enable it later on here. Alright, so now what we want to do is I'm going to set statically the screen width and height. This will allow me to know how many tiles are always on the screen. So to do that, we're going to use the VDP, right? And we're going to use set screen width. And we're going to do, there's a couple options here. We're going to do 320. And then we're also going to set the screen height, and this one's going to be 240. And note that that is a method name, that is not a parameter. Alright, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to grab the palette from our image and load it into the palette at position 0. So there's 4 palettes you can load. We're only going to be using palette 0 for the purpose of this video. This would allow you to have a palette for the intro screen and then a palette for the actual in-game, and then maybe another palette for the pause menu if that's something that you wanted. There's essentially 4 palettes that you can use. And then there are essentially 2 layers that you can use. So you can really only have one layer on top of the other. So there's an A and a B. And they're essentially planes. So you would have plane A and plane B, where one is your background and one would be text, as an example. Or one might be a background, the other might be a character, if you're looking at a side scroller. So let's go ahead and load the palette. So to do this, we're just going to use VDP _set palette. And PAL 0. Don't confuse PAL with the region. This PAL 0 means palette 0. So you have 0, 1, 2, and 3, which are your 4. And then what we're going to do is we're going to take the palette from our image and we're going to kind of load that into this palette. So to do that, we will reference our logo. Actually, go to that resource file and make sure we get it right. So we'll copy that, paste this over here, and just do .palette. And then we do a hyphen, and then greater than, and then data. Don't forget the semicolon at the end. And this will load the palette from the image into the palette in memory, so that the system knows what colors to render, right? We've extracted that palette. There's a limit of 512 colors that the Sega Genesis has available to it that it knows about. There's a chance that we use the color or a shade that it didn't know about. This will actually allow it to adapt to the closest one it knows about. So this saves us from having to rebuild that image from scratch just for the system. And then the next thing we're going to do is we're going to draw the image. So we're going to do VDP. We're going to do draw image. Now there's two variables. There's there's two functions. There's a draw image and there's a draw image EX, which is kind of exact. So in this case, we're just going to do draw image. And we're going to do BG_A. So this is going to use the plane A, or kind of that layer A. And then we want our variable holding our image. And then our coordinates. Here, I'm just going to use 0, 0. And then once that's there, we can re-enable the interrupts. So if we ran this right now, here you can see we've got some things going on that are not pleasant, right? So we're going to fix the fading code, and then we're going to see if we might need to readjust that image. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to do a memory copy, right? And I'm going to copy, we're going to do the palette complete variable. And then we're going to use our logo palette. Right, whoops. Again, we're going to grab the data from it. And we're going to do 32 times 2. Alright, and now to do the fade in and the fade out, it's very simple. All we're going to do is we're just going to say that I want you to do VDP, fade in, and then we're going to do 0, and then we're going to do 63. And that's essentially should be our black from the color palette. But you're fading in from and to, right? So we're fading in from 0 all the way up to 63. Again, there are 64 colors in that palette. And then we're going to do our palette complete variable. And then we're going to do, this is how many frames do you want this thing to take to fade in? I'm just going to do 100 here. And then we'll see what that looks like. And then to fade it out, you're going to do VDP, fade out. Fade out's a little bit different, but again, there's a from, and then a to, and then however many frames. So in this case, let's give it 200 frames to fade out. And then if we wanted to, we could literally just copy this, do the same thing twice. That'll fade in, fade out, fade in, fade out. And then the last thing we're going to do is stop the music. So we're going to do XGM, stop play. So now if we compile and run this. So right off the bat, what we can see is things are actually looking decent here. But what we're going to do is we're going to adjust this image a little bit. So let's actually take it to 320 by 240. And let's see how we can make that look. So let's do canvas size. Actually, let's do... First, let's do image size. And let's do 192 by 192. Actually, let's do this. Let's take... We're going to crop this thing all the way down. Okay. Now that we have that, we're at 702, 702. I'm going to change this to 192, 192. Now I'm going to change the canvas size. So we did 320 by 240. Right, and then I'm going to fill that with black. We're going to set the mode to index color. I'm going to leave force to none. I'm going to set matte to black. And realistically, we could have did this with the original image. We could have just set this matte to black and it probably would have fixed that issue. But let's do the whole screen so you can kind of get that idea of what that might look like. Because chances are, if you're developing a splash screen, you're probably going to want to design the whole screen and not just something in the middle. But we do this. Now if we do export, save for web legacy. Alright. So now see all these color palettes here, we want to trim this down. So once again we do 128. Bump that down to 64. Here we can see we've trimmed down all of those. We're going to set this thing to black. We'll just do black. Make sure it's right. Uncheck transparency. Our dimensions are 320 by 240. We're going to save this. And this time I'm just going to overwrite that image directly. So C drive code, Genesis intro, resources. Here's our image. We're just going to replace it. Now that we've replaced it, we need to run a clean and a recompile. Otherwise it won't pick it up. And there we go. So there you can see the fade in, the fade out, fade in again. Here, we'll go ahead and do a reset here so you can see it again. Just do a hard reset. So that's your fade in, and then that's your fade out, and then that's your fade in, and then that's your second fade out, and then the music stops, and this is normally where you'd take it to a title screen. So one thing we can do, if you notice that fade out was kind of slow, so we can change these to 100. compile. Then the fade in and the fade out should be the same speed. So there's your faster fade out. And that's really all there is to creating the splash screen. Here you can see the code is very minimal. Once you get the graphics there, it's really just drawing it to the screen. And honestly, if you don't want to do the fading, then you really don't have to do any of this. You can really just draw it onto the screen. But that's really it for this video. Drop me a comment below. Let me know what you guys think. And if you want any related tutorials in the future, drop me a comment below as well. And let me know some topics that you would like to have covered. Thank you for watching.